This is a story about a 16th century country priest and the extraordinary records he kept. It deals with ordinary people in an unimportant place, whose claim to fame is that they lived through the most decisive revolution in English history and had a priest who wrote it all down.
The Voices of Morebath is about a small Devon village over the most traumatic and revolutionary 50 years of the 16th century, about what happened to their lifestyle because of the Reformation. The centre of the story, the centre of the village, is a priest, Sir Christopher Trickey. Priests were called Sir, as now they're called Father, who kept the parish accounts, which he read out to his parishioners, and into which he put the story of all their common concerns.
Will desire you that you will lay forth this money again of the church stock in remembrance of...
Sir Christopher's voice comes across in the account as punctilious, slightly self-assertive, a little cantankerous, but somebody passionately engaged in every minute detail of the community's life. Sir Christopher came to Morebath in the summer of 1520 and saw himself as a much-needed breath of fresh air for Morebath. From the moment of his arrival, he flung himself into a flurry of activity,
which over the next 15 years would gather and grow until it resembled not so much a breath as a gale, and which simultaneously transformed the interior of his church and the devotional life of his parish.
Morebath Church now is well kept, but rather bare. Very different in the 16th century. The place was alive with standing figures, painted and gilded statues of saints, and these saints were not just furniture. They were invoked by name. Women put flowers, gave their rosaries to the statues. So Morebath people felt themselves surrounded by a heavenly host who were on their side. And Sir Christopher himself was passionately devoted to the cult of the saints. The heart of the Reformation under Henry VIII was the abolition of the Pope's authority and the substitution of royal authority. He needed a divorce. The Pope wouldn't give it to him, so he rearranged the English Church so that he could give himself a divorce. In Morebath, the Reformation really begins to affect the parish from 1538 onwards, with the attack which Henry ordered on the cult of the saints. They're ordered to put out the lights in front of the saints, to stop invoking them. The parishioners were told that they must not repose their trust
and affiance in any other works devised by men's fantasies besides Scripture, as in offering of money, candles or tapers to images or relics, or kissing or licking the same, saying over a number of beads, or in such like superstition.
Well, Sir Christopher had been encouraging his parishioners to do exactly these things for the last 15 years, so those words must have been so many arrows in his heart. The death of Henry VIII and the accession of his 9-year-old son, Edward VI, who'd been raised a Protestant, really changes the whole pace and content of the Reformation. Edward's government began to implement a very drastic Protestantizing, the stripping out of images, the whitewashing of paintings, a complete cultural revolution which was hated in the West Country.
At the root of it all was religion and the social impact of rapid religious change, implicit in the advance of Protestantism, more radical than anything Morebath or any other parish in Devon had ever contemplated, even in nightmare.
By 1549, the process of Reformation had been so traumatic that the whole of the West Country rose in rebellion, and 5 young men were sent out from this church to besiege the city of Exeter, to join the rebels there. One of the great paradoxes of the account is that he actually documents the community committing high treason. And he did that because they spent money to do it, and all money had to be accounted for. And Sir Christopher had written down the details. using the word camp.
At their going forth to St. David's Down camp.
And in the summer of 1549, the word camp meant rebel camp. But you have to remember that almost the whole county was involved in it. And since everybody was doing it, Morebath must have felt it was all right. As it turned out, it was a disastrous rebellion. So he went back to the record and blotted out the word camp each time it occurs in an attempt to cover his tracks. Fortunately, time has faded the ink and it's possible to read what's underneath now. By the end of Edward's reign, it looks as if the priest has accepted the inevitable, and the accounts that year begin by reciting the king's title, including Supreme Head in Earth of the Church of England. He's surrendered. It's a cruel irony, because within a couple of months, the king was dead, and to Sir Christopher's immense delight, there is a Catholic queen, Queen Mary on the throne. And immediately everybody knew that this would involve the reconstruction of Catholicism. And he put down on paper for the first time what he really felt about Edward, what he really felt about Mary.
In all these men's time, the which was in the time of King Edward VI, the church ever decayed, and then died the king. And Queen Mary's grace did succeed, and how the church was comforted again in her time, and what gifts were given to the church, now ye shall have knowledge of.
He's allowed himself, in those words, to put on record that Edward's reign was a disaster. This church ever decayed, and that Mary's reign was bliss. Now was how the church was comforted. He judges England's history by what it does to Morebath. For him to have done all that is a supreme irony, because within a matter of days of his writing that, news had come to Morebath that Queen Mary was dead, that the Princess Elizabeth, Anne Boleyn's daughter, a Protestant, had ascended the throne, and the whole roller coaster of Tudor Reformation was on its next roll. Elizabeth's reign meant for Morebath a rerun of everything that had happened in Edward's reign. There are now no devotional activities. The whole thing is radically simplified as the religious activity settles down in a Protestant pattern.
The unthinkable alternative to conformity of Sir Christopher was to leave his vicarage and the people he had baptised, married and buried for 40 years.
He continues to serve the parish into his 80s. He died in May 1574.
He had been their priest, Catholic and Protestant, for 54 years. He had been the spirit of Morebath, the chronicler of its dramatic and sometimes tragic share in the religious revolutions of that turbulent age. And, when the time came, he had eased them into a slow and settled conformity to a new order of things. Perhaps Morebath knew that with Sir Christopher Trickey they had buried something of themselves.
Log on via BBC to bbc.co.uk/Samuel Johnson for the full shortlist and the chance to win a complete set of the shortlisted books.